Hey there, welcome back. Tonight we're going to take a journey through a part of history that many forget. A time before maps, before ships, before the world was divided. We will talk today about America before Columbus, a story of the forgotten world. We'll begin in just a moment, but first, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far our little storytelling circle reaches. And if this brings you peace, consider liking the video or even subscribing. It helps more than you know. Now, let's begin tonight's story. Let's begin with something simple. A question. How did the first people arrive in the Americas? The answer is quiet, steady, and deeply human. It began during the last ice age, around 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. At that time, large parts of the earth were covered in ice. Sea levels were lower, and between what we now call Russia and Alaska, there was no ocean, only land. That land is called the Bering Land Bridge, or Beringia. It was not narrow or steep. It was wide, cold, windy, covered in grass and snow. It stretched hundreds of kilometers across the north, and it connected Asia to North America. People crossed it slowly, likely following large animals like mammoths or bison. These were hunter-gatherers, small groups of families moving together, searching for food, firewood, and shelter. They had stone tools, they knew how to build simple shelters, and they were deeply connected to the land. As the ice began to melt, the land bridge slowly disappeared underwater, but the people had already crossed. They were now living in what we call Alaska, and from there they continued to move south, over generations, over centuries. Some followed the coast, using small boats and fishing tools. Others moved inland, walking through forests, plains, and valleys. There were no borders, no names for the land, just open space, rivers, animals, and the quiet rhythm of survival. This movement is called migration, but it didn't happen in a single moment. It took thousands of years. People moved slowly, not to explore, but to live. They settled where there was water, warmth, and food. Today, archaeologists still find evidence of these early communities. In Canada, at the Bluefish Caves, animal bones with cut marks suggest human presence around 24,000 years ago. In Chile, the site of Monteverde shows signs of early life. Wooden tools, footprints, small shelters, possibly as early as 14,500 years ago. There are campsites, fire pits, tools, and bones, but no written language, no stone monuments. These people left no kings or buildings behind, only small signs that they were here. Over time, their descendants would spread across both continents. North, Central, and South America became home to thousands of unique cultures, each shaped by their climate, land, and traditions. But all of them share this one thing. They came from the same small groups who crossed the ice and walked into a new world. No conquest, no flag, just quiet determination and the will to survive. As time passed, those early families of hunter-gatherers began to settle more permanently. They planted seeds, they raised animals, they built homes from earth, stone, and wood. The pace of life changed. It became slower, more organized. And in time, these small communities grew into something larger. They became civilizations. Let's start in the north, in the central valleys near the Mississippi River. There, a culture arose that many people today have never heard of. It's called the Mississippian culture, and at its center was a city named Cahokia. Cahokia stood near what is now St. Louis in the United States. At its peak, around the year 1100, it may have had 20,000 people. That was a large city by medieval standards, larger than London at the same time. The people of Cahokia built large earthen mounds, carefully shaped into pyramids with flat tops. They used no metal tools, no wheels, only baskets, shovels, and strong hands. Some mounds were used for ceremonies. Others may have supported temples or homes of leaders. At the center of the city was a massive open plaza, a place for markets, games, or gatherings, and surrounding it were wooden fences and rows of houses. Trade reached far. From the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, objects moved: shells, stones, feathers, copper, and stories. And yet no one knows exactly why Cahokia eventually declined. By the 1400s, it had largely emptied out, but the earth mounds remain, silent, patient reminders of a world before maps. Now, let's move south into the highlands of Central America. This is where some of the most well-known ancient cultures lived: the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca. Though the Inca were in South America, and we'll get there in a moment. The Maya were thinkers, builders, astronomers. They lived in cities like Tikal, Palenque, and Copan, surrounded by thick jungle. They built tall stone pyramids and carved calendars into stone. They tracked the stars with great precision. Their writing system was complex: glyphs carved into temples and books made of bark. Time, to the Maya, was sacred. They believed the universe moved in cycles. Every moment had a meaning. Farther north, the Aztec Empire rose in the Valley of Mexico. Its capital, Tenochtitlan, was built on an island in the middle of a lake. It had canals, bridges, gardens, and stone temples. The Aztec believed in many gods, each connected to nature: the sun, the rain, the corn, the wind. Ceremony was part of everyday life. Music, dance, offerings, even sacrifices were ways to keep the world in balance. The Aztec also had markets, enormous ones, where tens of thousands of people traded goods daily. They used cacao beans as money, and they recorded history with painted codices, books made by hand. To the south, in the high mountains of the Andes, the Inca Empire stretched along the spine of South America. They ruled over 2,500 miles of land, connected by stone roads and rope bridges. They built Machu Picchu, a city in the clouds, and developed systems for farming on mountain terraces. The Inca had no written language. Instead, they used a system of knotted cords called quipu to record numbers and stories. Their capital was Cusco, and from there, they organized food storage, road maintenance, and military defense, all without wheels or money. Everything was managed by shared labor and respect for the emperor, who was considered a descendant of the sun. Before cities had names, before calendars and foreign maps, life in the Americas moved to its own rhythm. It was shaped by seasons, by the sun and moon, by rivers, forests, and mountains. Across these lands, millions of people lived day to day, not as warriors or kings, but as farmers, fishers, weavers, and children. Let's take a quiet look at what life was like. Food was central, of course. In the forests of the north, people hunted deer and elk. On the plains, they followed bison herds. By rivers and lakes, they fished with nets or spears. And in many regions, they farmed. In Mesoamerica, the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, grew together in harmony. Corn stood tall, beans climbed the stalks. Squash spread across the ground, keeping weeds away and the soil moist. This method was simple but wise. It fed entire villages. In the Andes, people grew potatoes, over 1,000 varieties. They stored them by freeze-drying in the mountain air, a method still used today. Llamas and alpacas carried goods and gave wool. Guinea pigs were kept for food. Near the sea, salt and dried fish were traded between villages. Food was shared, stored, celebrated. It was part of the cycle of planting, harvesting, and returning to the earth. Homes were different in each region. In the forests of the Northeast, people lived in longhouses built from wood and bark. Several families might share one, each with their own fire. On the plains, teepees could be moved quickly, perfect for following the bison herds. In desert regions, homes were carved into cliffs or built from adobe, a mix of mud and straw that stayed cool in the heat. In the Andes, houses were made of stone, carefully placed without mortar, so tight that even today, many of them still stand. Inside these homes, there were no glass windows, just clay pots, woven mats, tools made of bone or stone, and spaces for gathering. At night, firelight flickered, and stories began. Storytelling was the heart of memory. There were no books, no podcasts, but there were voices. Elders told of the stars, of the spirits, of how the world began. They explained why the wind moved, why animals had names, and how people should treat the earth. Stories taught more than history. They taught behavior, kindness, balance. Some stories were about tricksters, clever animals, or people who broke rules and paid the price. Beyond daily routines, beyond farming and building and gathering, the peoples of the Americas carried with them something just as important: knowledge. Carefully passed from generation to generation, often without writing, but never without meaning. Let's explore 3 parts of that knowledge: astronomy, medicine, and trade. All across the Americas, people looked to the sky. The stars were not just distant lights. They were markers of time, messengers of the seasons, and often sacred beings. In the highlands of Mexico, the Maya tracked the movements of planets with great precision. They built observatories, round towers with carefully placed windows, aligned with the rising of Venus or the sun during solstices. They created multiple calendars, including a sacred 260-day cycle and a 365-day solar calendar. These helped guide planting, ceremonies, and leadership decisions. Farther north, many cultures built stone circles, mounds, or wooden posts aligned with solstices and equinoxes. In Chaco Canyon, in present-day New Mexico, the ancestral Puebloans carved a spiral into a cliff. At summer solstice, sunlight passed perfectly through a gap, shining onto the spiral's center. Even without telescopes or charts, these communities understood the patterns of the sky. They watched patiently, and they remembered. Traditional medicine was rooted in close observation of the land, of the body, and of time. Each region had its own plants, its own methods, its own healers. In the Amazon, there are plants with hundreds of uses for cuts, fevers, pain, and even digestion. In the forests of the north, willow bark was chewed for pain relief. It contains salicin, a natural chemical very similar to aspirin. Healers used herbs, smoke, sweat lodges, and massage. But healing was more than just physical. It was spiritual, balanced. It involved the whole person, their mind, body, dreams, and place in the world. Illness was often seen as an imbalance, not an enemy. And the goal of medicine was not just to fight, but to restore. Even though most communities lived far apart, they were never fully isolated. The Americas were connected by vast trade networks, many without written records. Goods and ideas traveled for hundreds, even thousands of miles. Obsidian from central Mexico has been found in the American Southwest. Shells from the Gulf of Mexico reached the Great Lakes. Copper from the north moved south along river systems. The Inca built a system of roads, over 25,000 miles long, called the Capacñan. Messengers, called chasquis, ran between stations, carrying messages on foot. In other regions, trade was done by canoe, or on foot. There were no horses until after European contact, and no wheels in use for transport. Yet these systems worked, not with money, but with exchange. Goods for goods, services for services, always based on need and relationship. And through these trade routes, people also shared stories, songs, dyes, seeds, and dreams. For thousands of years, the peoples of the Americas lived without knowing anyone else was out there. They believed they lived at the center of the world, or at least their world. And in truth, they did. But across the ocean, other people were sailing. Other maps were being drawn. And in the year 1492, ships reached the shores of the Caribbean. It was not a planned meeting. It was not a war at first. It was simply a new arrival. The first contact was small. A few ships, a few sailors. They didn't speak the same language, they didn't share the same gods, but they stood on the same earth. To the people of the Americas, the visitors looked strange. Their skin, their clothes, their animals, horses, pigs, and cattle were unfamiliar. To the Europeans, the land seemed rich and open. They saw gold. They saw opportunity. They saw something new. Neither side understood what would come next. At first, there was trade, gifts, curiosity. But something invisible came with the ships. Disease. Smallpox, measles, and influenza. Illnesses that had spread in Europe for centuries now entered a land where no one had immunity. Entire villages grew sick. Many died within days. Some communities disappeared in a single season, without a single battle, without a single word exchanged. Other changes followed. Horses, once unknown in the Americas, spread quickly, especially among the peoples of the Great Plains. They changed hunting, travel, and even warfare. Iron tools and metal weapons were stronger than stone. Wheat, sugar, and new fruits arrived, along with animals like sheep and cows. But much was lost too. Languages faded. Codices were burned. Temples crumbled. The balance that had lasted for generations began to shift. Not all change was immediate, and not all was destruction. Some people found ways to adapt. They learned new skills, blended old traditions with new tools, and kept their communities together. Still, the quiet world that had existed for thousands of years, of pyramids, longhouses, farming terraces, and sacred calendars, began to fade. And yet, it never disappeared. Even today, the descendants of the Maya, the Inca, the Aztec, the Mississippians, and hundreds of other nations still live, speak, remember, and rebuild. Tonight, we've followed a long path. We walked with the first people as they crossed the cold, Bering Land Bridge, watched civilizations rise from the forest and stone, heard the quiet of daily life under sun and stars, and witnessed the moment when two worlds met for the first time. The world before Columbus was not empty. It was not waiting to be discovered. It was already full of languages, beliefs, families, and meaning. The people of the Americas had shaped the land for thousands of years. They knew its seasons, they respected its rhythms, and they lived with it, not above it. Their cities had calendars, their paths followed stars, their hands built without iron but with skill, purpose, and time. Much has changed. Many things have been lost, but not everything. If you walk through the forests of Mexico, you'll still hear the Maya tongue. In the Andes, farmers still plant terraces the way their ancestors did. In North America, elders still tell the old stories by firelight. And all across the continents, people are remembering, preserving, reviving. The past is not gone. So tonight, let us remember the world that came before, not in sorrow, but in quiet respect. Let us honor the long footsteps across the ice, the wisdom of those who planted maize and watched the sky, and the resilience of all who remained when the world changed. If this story helped you relax, feel free to like the video or subscribe. It really means a lot. And that, dear listener, is where our journey rests tonight. We've walked through ancient lands, quiet forests, and starry temples. Thank you for listening. Sleep well. Good night.